Magandang umaga, ako si Cherry Mercado. Narito na mga balita at serbisyong hatid namin para sa Pilipino. Ito ang Newsroom ngayon. Matapos ang mahigit na isang siglo, makasaysayang Balangiga Bells, pabalik na sa bansa ngayong umaga. Inaabangan na ang pagdating sa bansa ng makasaysayang Balangiga Bells mahigit 100 taon matapos itong kunin ng mga Amerikanong sundalo. Inaasahang lalapag ngayong umaga sa Villamor Air Base ang isang US C-130 cargo plane, lulan ang 3 kampana. 2 sa mga ito ay galing sa base ng US Air Force sa Wyoming. Nakadisplay naman ang isa pa sa US Army Museum sa South Korea. Taong 1901 nang kunin ng mga sundalong Amerikano ang Balangiga Bells sa Eastern Samar bilang gantimpala sa giyera laban sa mga Pilipino. Noong nakaraang taon, sinabi ni Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte sa kanyang State of the Nation address na gusto niyang maibalik sa bansa ang makasaysayang Balangiga Bells. Dumako tayo ngayon sa Villamor Air Base kung saan inaantabayanan ng eroplanong may dala ng mga kampana. Naroon ang aming senior correspondent na si David Santos. David, kamusta ngayon dyan?
Cherry, alam mo sa advisory na pinalabas ng Defense Department, maging ng US Embassy sa pagitan ng 9 to 10 o'clock na yung umaga dapat yung C-130 cargo plane ng US Air Force kung saan lulan nga itong 3 makasaysayang Balangiga Bells. Pero hanggang sa ngayon, wala pa naman tayong nakikitang indication na nag-land na dito o nagta-taxi na papunta dito yung C-130 kung saan nakapwesto tayo ngayon, magiging mga bisita na sasaksi sa seremonya. Ngayong alas 11 kasi isasagawa naman yung formal handover ceremony. Pangungunahan ito ng mga matataas opisyal, sina Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana para sa gobyerno ng Pilipinas at si Ambassador Sung Kim naman para sa Estados Unidos. Magtatalumpati sina Lorenzana at Kim sa gaganaping seremonya nanggaling sa Cadena Air Base sa Okinawa, Japan ang mga kampana matapos silang i-pull out mula sa mga military bases sa Wyoming, sa Estados Unidos at sa South Korea. Sinamahan mismo ni US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Joseph Felter ang paghatid ng mga kampana dito sa Maynila. Sa pansin-pansin na yung C-130 plane, Cherry, na maghahatid ng mga kampana base sa inilabas na photo release ng US Embassy. Ang eroplanong ito may emblem na may katagang The Spirit of MacArthur. Gayun din ang mukha ni US General Douglas MacArthur na siya noon nagbigkas ng popular na linyang I Shall Return. Ito ang sinabi ni MacArthur noong ikalawang digmaan na babalik siya at ang pwersang Amerikano dito sa Pilipinas. Ito'y para palayain ang bansa mula sa mga kamay ng mga Hapones na sumakop sa atin noon. So hindi natin masabi, Sherry, kung ito ba ay sinadya o nagkataon lamang, pero kilala naman natin talagang Estados Unidos sa paggamit ng mga symbolism sa mga makasaysayang mga kaganapan gaya ng pagsauli ngayon ng Balangiga Bells. Unang in-schedule, Sherry, yung seremonyang ito para mamayang 1:30 ngayong hapon kung saan mismo si Pangulong Duterte sana ang sasaksi sa handover ng mga kampana. Pero yun nga, mas napaaga ito ngayon alas 11 ng umaga at hindi na makakadalo ang Pangulo. Sa halip ng Pangulo, darating si Executive Secretary Salvador Medjaldea. Sherry?
Okay, antabayanan natin yan at may special coverage ang CNN Philippines sa pagdating nitong historical Balangiga Bells. Abangan ng mga kababayan natin yan. Maraming salamat, David Santos. Nag-uulat ng live mula sa Villamor Air Base. Ang pagbabalik ng Balangiga Bells ay magpapaigting sa ugnayan ng Pilipinas at ng Estados Unidos. Yan ay ayon kay Philippine Military Academy Professor Sonny Busa na dating Consul General sa US State Department. Sa panayam ng CNN Philippines, tinalakay ni Professor Busa ang kahalagahan ng makasaysayang kampana, lalo na para sa mga kabataan.
It's the perfect jumping point because now, if you didn't know about the bells, you will after today. So, let's say you're a 5th grade student or a high school student and you hear on the news, they watch you here and they say, Bells of Balangiga, what's that? And then they hear about it and then they say, oh, well, that's pretty cool. And then they listen and they go, there was a Philippine-American War? and then it just snowballs into more information wanted. And so, yes, it provides a catalyst for further discussions about what happened. And this discussion doesn't have to be incriminating or acerbic or bitter. It's just a statement of fact. This is what happened. Americans died, Filipinos died, and after that, we moved on.
Kaugnay po niya ng ating issue ngayon. Sa inyo, ano ang inyong saloobin sa muling pagbabalik ng Balangiga Bells sa Pilipinas? Oras na para boses nyo naman ang aming pakinggan. Bukas na ang aming Facebook Live para sa inyong mga komento. Kayo ay nasa newsroom ngayon dito sa CNN Philippines. Balikan natin ang pinakamalaking balita ngayong umaga. Parating na sa bansa ang makasaysayang Balangiga Bells mahigit isang siglo matapos itong kunin ng mga sundalong Amerikano bilang gantimpala nila sa Philippine-American War. Inaabangan ng mga taga-Eastern Samar ang pagbabalik ng mga kampana sa kanilang lugar. Naroon ang aming correspondent na si Trisha Terada. Trisha, kamusta ngayon sa Samar?
Well, Cherry, na talagang nasasabik at naghahanda ang mga residente ng Eastern Samar para sa pagbabalik ng orihinal na kampana ng Balangiga matapos ang isang daang taon. At kasalukuyan ngayong nagkakaroon ng viewing party dito sa Parish of St. Lawrence bilang paghahanda na nga yan sa pagdadating ng orihinal na kampana ng Balangiga. Ngayong araw, bagaman ay hindi pa lalapag ang Balangiga Bells, ay nakahanda na ang banderitas at mga watawat na dilaw at puti at tuloy-tuloy ang paglilinis maging ang paghahanda ng entablado at paglalagyan ng mga kampana. Gabi-gabi naman nag-eensayo ang mga kabataang magtatanghal ng sayaw ng Balangiga kung saan ikukwento ang storya ng Balangiga at kung bakit importante ang mga kampana nito para sa kanilang bayan. Nabanggit na nga sa atin ng mga residente dito na taon-taong ginagawa ito para ipaalala sa mga kabataan ang kasaysayan ng kanilang bayan. Kaya ganoon na lamang din yung pagpapahalaga nila ng mga bata kahit na hindi pa nga talaga nila nakikita yung kampana ng Balangiga. Cherry?
Trisha, kailan na ulit inaasahang, anong inaasahang mangyari pagdating dyan?
Well, Cherry, inaasahan na darating yung kampana ng Balangiga sa Sabado ng hapon. At dahil nga sa huling impormasyon na nakarating sa atin at nakarating din sa parokya dito na posibleng kasama si Pangulong Duterte, ay patuloy na ina-adjust pa rin yung mga mangyayari. Pero base dun sa original na plano, paglapag ng kampana ng Balangiga ay patutunugin itong mga Balangiga Bells para malaman ng bayan ng Eastern Samar o ng Balangiga na nakarating na at natanggap na nila ang Balangiga Bells. Pagkatapos niyan ay ilalabas ito dun sa platform dito rin din sa labas ng simbahan para magkaroon ng public viewing at saka naman patutunugin ito muli sa kanilang simbang gabi. Cherry?
Okay, maraming salamat sa iyo, Trisha Terada, nagulat ng live mula sa Eastern Samar. At kanina tinanong namin kung ano naman ang inyong saloobin sa muling pagbabalik ng Balangiga Bells sa bansa. Ang sabi ni Brian J. Labanon, sila ay talagang masaya dahil ito ay isang tagumpay sa Pilipinas. Anya, gumawa ng kasaysayan si Pangulong Duterte sa bansa. Pero para kay Lani Padernal, dahil kay President Duterte nalaman ng mamamayan ang history ng Balangiga Bells at muli itong naibalik sa bansa. Maraming salamat sa inyong mga komento. Yan ang mga balita at serbisyong hatid namin para sa Pilipino. Samahan niyo ako muli bukas. Ako si Cherry Mercado at ito ang Newsroom ngayon. Susunod na ang Sports Desk kasama si Andre Felix.
Awit na halang dumon sa tanang Pasko, magalibayon. Bagong tuig, bagong kinabuhi, tuyong sa among mga...
The 3 Balangiga Bells on board this U.S. aircraft. It's a C-130, has actually landed in Villamor Air Base after 117 years. That's more than a century. The bells are finally home. watching a CNN Philippines special presentation. Again, the return of the 3 Balangiga bells. These national treasures are finally home today. American troops took the 3 bronze bells from a church in the town of Balangiga in eastern Samar in 1901 as a trophy of war. Previous administrations have called for their return, but it was in 2017 when President Rodrigo Duterte made his case and asked that the national treasures be returned. 2 of the bells were on display at a U.S. Air Force base in Wyoming. A 3rd one has been housed at a U.S. Army museum in South Korea. The turnover ceremony for the 2 of the 3 bells was held in Wyoming last month. That happened in November, and it actually marked the beginning of the repatriation process. It was Philippine Ambassador to the U.S., Babe Romualdez, who was there in Wyoming, along with U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis. Ambassador Romualdez spoke to CNN Philippines about the long journey home for the bells. Romualdez also said the return of the bells is the right thing to do and puts closure to the controversy between the 2 allies. Again, what you're seeing on your screen right now is a U.S. C-130 aircraft carrying the 3 Balangiga bells, 2 of them coming from Wyoming at the Warren Air Force Base over there, and the 3rd one in South Korea. The 3 bells were flown from Okinawa, Japan to the Philippines. Previous administrations have actually made attempts to get the bells back, and President Duterte made it a priority to do the same in July of last year.
Senate.
It was in his last year's State of the Nation address that President Rodrigo Duterte talked about one of the bloodiest confrontations in the 3-year Philippine-American War.
In 1901, there was known as Balangiga, and that is Eastern Samar. It was the time for Philippine-American War. A combined group of Filipino villagers and guerrillas in an effort to defend Samar Island from the alien invaders.
Armed only with bolos, Filipino insurgents killed 48 of 74 U.S. servicemen to fight for their freedom. The ringing of 3 church bells in the town of Balangiga signaled the start of the surprise attack by Filipino rebels that day. The Americans retaliated in a series of attacks and seized the bronze church bells as trophies of war. U.S. Army records say 759 Filipinos were killed or captured. Some Filipino estimates place the number at more like 50,000. 2 bells were housed in a U.S. Army base in Wyoming, the 3rd one at a U.S. Army museum in South Korea. Previous administrations have called for the return of the bells, but they were unsuccessful. The president talked about this painful moment in Philippine history and demanded the return of the bells.
Give us back those Balangiga bells. They are ours. They belong to the Philippines. They are part of our national heritage.
In August, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis approved the return of the bells to the Philippines. He said giving the bells back would cement ties between the 2 allies. But some U.S. lawmakers oppose the move. They say returning the bells set a dangerous precedent for future veterans' memorials. The journey home for the historic bells started in a turnover ceremony last month. The U.S. Defense Secretary was there, along with Philippine Ambassador Babe Romualdez.
October of 2016, there was a defense ministers meeting in Clark Air Base where President Duterte met with Secretary Mattis, and that was one of the first points that he told Secretary Mattis at that time that we would like to see those belts back in the Philippines. And Secretary Mattis very clearly said that we will do everything we can to ensure the return of those belts.
As the bells make their way home, Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana says it's time to heal the wounds of the past and to remember Americans and Filipinos fought together to end the Japanese occupation.
It's very significant because it's actually a property of the church that were taken by the United States Army. The significance of this is that we have been trying to get this for a long time.
Even during your time, sir?
Even before my time. During the time of President Ramos, he tried to get it. The Filipino communities in the U.S. also came on board for the call for the return of the bells.
While they are a reminder of the country's struggle against American colonization, the bells are also a symbol of national pride. And their return home can put closure to the Philippine-American War. Pinky Webb, CNN Philippines. Our senior correspondent David Santos joins us live from Villamor Air Base, where the U.S. aircraft carrying the bells has landed. David, give us a sense of what's happening there right now.
Well, firstly, Pinky, the C-130 cargo plane of the U.S. Air Force carrying these Balangiga bells arrived here at the Villamor Air Base at around 10:30 this morning. That's about a few minutes ago. And what we're seeing now are officials from both the Philippines and U.S. government approaching the plane, perhaps to check on the crates and the bells have been placed. And anytime these bells will be unloaded from the plane, and we can expect the ceremony, the handover ceremony, to formally begin at around 11 o'clock based on the schedule provided by the Defense Department. Now, this ceremony will be led by top of Philippine and U.S. officials. Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana will lead the delegation from the Philippine government, while Ambassador Sung Kim from the United States. Accompanying Ambassador Kim are the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Joseph Felter, who, by the way, personally escorted the bells from the Cadena Air Base in Japan to here in Manila. Also joining them is U.S. Indo-PACOM Chief Admiral Philip Davidson. They're also here to witness the formal handover of these bells. And we are expecting both Secretary Lorenzana and Ambassador Kim to deliver speeches. We are also seeing, based on the program provided to us by the Defense Department, we are expecting also some visitors like I mentioned, rather Executive Secretary Salvador Miguel-Gea. We also heard the name of Gordon, Jose Manuel Bay Romualdez is also here, as well as other members of the U.S. Embassy. I think we are going to start the ceremony. It will be commenced with the national anthem of the national anthems of both countries, followed by prayer. Then the succeeding rundown of the program will have the speeches of Secretary Lorenzana and Ambassador.
Yeah, David, also just, the picture sent by the U.S. Embassy also showed the bells in a crate over there at the Cadena Air Base in Japan. You were saying earlier that it's U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense Felter who was accompanying the bells over there from Cadena Air Base in Japan all the way here in Manila?
Yes, he is. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Felter is the representative of the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Defense Department,
right,
based in South and Southeast Asia. So basically, he is among the more high-ranking U.S. government official in the region. So along with Ambassador Kim, they are the ones playing a major role in this ceremony represents.
David?
Yes, go ahead, Pinky.
All right, David, we're losing, our communication isn't very clear right now. We're going to give you a little bit time to have a more solid connection with you. But right now we are seeing members of, I believe that is Executive Secretary Medialdea together with Defense Secretary Delphine Lorenzana over there at the Villamor Air Base. Again, breaking news here on CNN Philippines. The 3 Balangiga Bells on board a C-130 U.S. plane has landed in the Philippines. The bells are home after 117 years. Our David Santos is at the Villamor Air Base and he'll give us more details a little later on. We are awaiting, of course, to see the Balangiga bells coming from the Cadena Air Base in Japan. 2 of those bells actually came from Wyoming at the Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, and the other bell was housed in South Korea. All 3 bells eventually made their way to Japan. They were there, and all 3 are already here in the Philippines, particularly, of course, the Villamor Air Base. In attendance, Ambassador Sung Kim, U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Felter, Ambassador Babe Romualdez, Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdea, Defense Secretary Delphine Lorenzana. You see the men already walking at the runway of the Villamor Air Base.
Ladies and gentlemen,
on the eve of the much-awaited homecoming of the historic Balangiga bells, or what old-timers in Eastern Samar call Balangiga. Some residents of the town tell CNN Philippines they are excited for their return. The bells will be flown in, or have been rather flown in, from Villamor Air Base before it will be, and after that, it shall be brought to Eastern Samar. Malacanang says President Duterte will no longer attend the ceremony on the recommendation of Defense Secretary Delphine Lorenzana. The President will instead be in Samar on December 15th for the turnover of the bells to the Balangiga Church. There is of course, the turnover ceremony that is expected just in a couple of minutes. We are going to await that, and of course, speeches from representatives from the Philippines as well as from the United States. The Balangiga bells have been on U.S. soil for 117 years. Today, they're home. You're watching a CNN Philippines special presentation. Stay with us. We're going to show you live pictures at the Villamor Air Base. The plane, it's a U.S. aircraft, a 130 carrying the Balangiga bells, has landed. That happened at about 10:30 in the morning. And what officials have told us, obviously, is that eventually, of course, the bells will be unloaded from that U.S. aircraft. They came from Cadena Air Base in Japan. Again, just to give you a brief background, these are 3 bells, but 2 of them were housed in Warren Air Base in Wyoming, and the other one housed in South Korea. All 3 are coming, or rather came from Cadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan, and are finally home in the Philippines. Let's get more details on this. Our senior correspondent, David Santos, joins us from Villamor Air Base, where the U.S. aircraft carrying the bells has landed. David, so we were talking a while ago. We lost you there. The connection wasn't very good. What's the latest now?
Well, we just saw our guests led by Secretary Lorenzana and Ambassador Kim walk through the stage from the hangar where the C-130 plane, cargo plane of the U.S. Air Force, had taxied. And now, anytime now, we're just 4 minutes away from 11 o'clock in the morning, where we are expected the program to start the formal handover ceremony. Which I would just like to point out, Pinky, that prior to this event, the Defense Department, or the Philippine government in general, had released an advisory urging the audience, people attending this morning ceremony, to come in white. If you notice, you must have noticed from the material, the pictures that have been showing to you from here at the Villamor tarmac, many of our officials were wearing white. We did ask that to the Defense Department. Quite specifically, they had asked for guests to come in white. Secretary Lorenzana, so basically just to celebrate the return of the bells without, specifically saying what the white color stands for. So we tried to ask some other employees, workers at the Defense Department why the choice of color white. They're saying basically it's some sort of a paying respect to the memory of those who died more than 100 years ago in this unfortunate incident in Balangiga. We must remember that 48 members of the U.S., rather American troops were killed in that ambush 170 years ago. Then after that, hundreds, if not thousands, of Filipino residents of Balangiga and nearby towns were also reported to have died or starved to death as a result of the U.S. forces taking revenge on the killing of their comrades. So perhaps that is the reason why the white is encouraged as a color for this ceremony. Speaking about symbolism, quickly, let me just also point out that the C-130 plane that had transported the Balangiga bells bore the emblem which had the word "The Spirit of MacArthur." Also with it, the face of U.S. General Douglas MacArthur, who, of course, you recall in our history, gave the popular line, "I shall return," of course, in reference to during World War II when MacArthur led also the liberation of the Philippine forces against the Japanese colonizers back then. So again, these are more of this program also has to do with symbolism, which is very common in many historic unprecedented programs or ceremonies that wherein the United States government would partake.
David, I heard that you were saying that, of course, when you talk about General MacArthur, it's the "I shall return" line. That is very famous, and we have bells, 3 bells, after 117 years, have returned home.
That's right, Pinky. And also we'd like to point out that this is going to be somehow not only historic, but an emotional moment for both countries. Both countries have emotional attachment to these bells. So it will be very interesting also how to maybe perhaps to the speeches of Secretary Lorenzana as well as Ambassador Kim, how they will be responding to this very historic, unprecedented event we are witnessing today.
That will form part of the speeches later after the turnover ceremony over there, the formal turnover ceremony at the Villamor Air Base. But of course, the history, David, I know you know this by heart. This was something President Rodrigo Duterte had demanded during his State of the Nation address in 2017. But let's not forget, even the time, Fidel V. Ramos, former President Fidel V. Ramos, he had asked for these bells, but apparently U.S. laws had actually prevented or prohibited the return of the bells.
But they even in the late 1950s were in Cheshire.
That's right.
Had written the American military, rather the American government to return these bells. Early on, even this negotiation for the return of the bells has taken almost half a century.
Yeah, it was a Jesuit priest, Horacio de la Costa, David, I believe, who wrote a letter to an American historian, if I'm not mistaken, asking or appealing for help for the return of the bells. So if we really look back, it was even in 1958 when there was a lot of interest, or at least a move to appeal for the return of the Balangiga bells.
Right. In fact, also we would like to point out that even to the last minute, for being honored. He brought back Philippine ceremony. There are still a number of U.S. veterans officials who had voiced their opposition to the return of the bells. They were saying that they were fearful, they were apprehensive that the return would somehow erase the memory of the fallen soldiers. Also, they were also concerned that this would open the doors for the return of other war trophies from the U.S. Forces after the Philippines. So, but then again, they had just had to comply with the law, which the President Donald Trump has signed this year.
Because they were worried that this would actually cause a precedent of some sorts. David, we'll get back to you in a little while. Again, still live pictures there from Villamor Air Base. That is the plane carrying the 3 Balangiga bells coming from Okinawa, Japan. The 2 bells coming from Wyoming made a stopover, I believe, in Philadelphia for some work, restoration work, and the other one actually came from South Korea. We are seeing somebody actually signaling possibly the offloading of the bells from that C-130, that U.S. aircraft C-130 plane. But in the meantime, let's speak to a Balangiga Bells advocate and San Francisco State University Philippine Studies and Philippine American Studies Professor Oscar Peñaranda via Viber call. Sir, good morning to you from the Philippines.
Good morning. It's nighttime here now. It's about
7 p.m.
7 p.m.
Right. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
All right, sir, right now we're showing live pictures at Villamor Air Base. The 3 Balangiga bells have arrived in the country at about 10:30 in the morning. That's about 30 minutes ago. Tell us more about what this means. What is the significance of all this? And how could this possibly even improve or make relationships better between the Philippines and the United States?
Well, it means many things. First, to answer the last questions you had about how could it improve the relations. Number one, a relationship will always improve if the two are involved in a conflict, face the truth about its history. That's why, to me, the beginning of the trouble started because of the Filipino-American War itself, as not being discussed and not being talked by the general public. So to me, that one significance of the consciousness of the Filipino people, the same way that Balangiga bells was taken and nobody knowing about it.
So
at
it's
the same time.
So it's
Yes,
facing
go
the
ahead.
truth about our history.
Yeah, I think that's where we should start. A good, healthy relationship should start like that. And if it doesn't start like that, then all the way down the years, it's not going to be parity. It's not going to be fair, which is what happened.
And so moving forward, very important, of course, we understand certainly opposition coming from U.S. veterans, but the bells are finally here in the Philippines. Tell us more about the significance of this now.
Say that again, I didn't quite get the last question.
Let's talk about the importance and the significance of the return of the bells now.
Okay, the return of the bells now. First, to me, the consciousness of the Filipino people in the Philippines is really not knowledgeable about that war. Not the same as the consciousness of the U.S. citizens here in the United States. They don't know about that war. So to me, the bringing back of that bells, as well as being good to the Filipino people, is good for the U.S. people too, because, you know, as a Filipino, because I'm a dual citizen, so as a Filipino, number one, the bells belongs to us. That's my the Philippines is my motherland, you know. And then as a U.S. citizen, I grew up here in the States. The U.S. itself, the U.S. Constitution itself says we must return those things. The bells are not part of a quote-unquote war booty. That's the property of relics, religion, and artifacts. So that's excluded from the law. So that itself, to me, sort of frees us from the ignorance and of history, of our history.
Professor, there is a bit of possible ignorance about the Philippine-American War.
Yes, you know, in all of structures of the Philippines, and I go there twice a year since I retired, I have not seen a structure dedicated to the memory of the Philippine-American War, to the people who fought that war, to the unnamed who died in that war. Only in Balangiga have I seen it, and only recently, just a few years back, when they built that planned plaza.
In fact, Professor, I'm sure the town of Balangiga is now also very famous because of the return of the bells.
Yes. Yeah. I go there every time I have a chance to. Because my hometown is Barugo, Leyte. I'm also from the Waray origin, and my grandfather was involved in that whole conflict as part of Lukban's right-hand man during that Philippine-American War in Samar.
Yeah.
So it has a personal ring to me also,
And I can just even, begin to imagine the kind of excitement of the people of Samar are feeling right now, possibly watching this live feed, that the bells are finally home, because it is the Philippines is its home, but in particular, it's in Balangiga in Eastern Samar.
Exactly, and the people of Balangiga was really the one who made that success. That became a thorn in the side of our people to get back the bells. It was the people of Balangiga, not the Revolutionary Army of Lukban, nor the U.S. Forces in the Philippines, but the town itself made that uprising successful. So it has.
With your indulgence, Professor, I hope you don't mind, just very quickly, I'd like to bring in again, just to tell those watching us right now, I'm assuming that is the crate already carrying the Balangiga bells. Those bells came from Okinawa in Japan. It came from the Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan. It was the U.S. Embassy that sent pictures to media regarding the bells in Okinawa, wherein they were placed in a crate, and now they've been unloaded from the C-130 aircraft of the United States. Professor, all right, let's get back to you. I just wanted to give our audience a heads up on what they're seeing live right now on their televisions and possibly even on their phones. So this is really historic. I mean, aside from it being historic, Professor, how else would you describe today's event?
Indeed it is, yes.
All right, so Professor, we are seeing the bells already being transported at the runway of Villamor Air Base. Professor, thank you so much for speaking to us. Professor Oscar Peñaranda joining us from San Francisco, California in the United States. Professor, good evening to you at maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat din. Walang anuman.
Thank you. The bells may have been gone for over a century, but stories of heroism live among Balangiga residents in Eastern Samar. They eagerly look forward to seeing the bells for the first time. More from Trisha Terada.
The long wait may soon be over for the residents of Balangiga, Samar, as the historic bells will soon be back in their town after more than a century. Though the bells have been away for 117 years, the longing for their return still lives among the great-grandsons and daughters of Balangiga.
We are so excited kung ano talaga ang itsura ng bells, how is it reflect the color, kung ano talaga yung materials na ginamit.
There is something more than being happy, more than being excited. Kasi 117 years, ang tagal noon. And we didn't expect it will come home.
Many of the living descendants have never seen the actual Balangiga bells, but the story about the bells and the heroism of their ancestors have been passed on from one generation to another through annual reenactment and storytelling.
Yung pagiging mga heroes ng aming mga ancestors, yung pagiging brave nila na hindi sila natakot na talunin or lumaban sa mga Amerikano.
Yung bells namin represents a lot of our as a people and as a place.
When the authentic Balangiga bells arrive here in Eastern Samar, these will be positioned in this platform where replicas used to be. The original bells will temporarily be hung here for public viewing until it is put back to its belfry in the exact same place where it tolled before the war.
Para sa amin naman simbahan, ang mga bells na yon is yun ang nagko-connect sa Diyos at sa mga tao. At the same time, sumisimbolo siya ng pagkakaisa.
The parish of St. Lawrence de Martyr had been reaching out to the U.S. since 1998. It was in July 2017 that the current parish priest sent an extensive letter explaining why the bells should be back. President Duterte has called for the return of the Balangiga bells in his State of the Nation address in some of his speeches. But prior to this, several administrations also backed the church's call until the U.S. finally decided to return the bells this December.
I think it's time for the bells to come back, but it was not due to any particular event or any particular statement. People have been working for this for many, many years.
As a compromise for U.S. war veterans, the U.S. government will provide replicas of the Balangiga bells.
I think, part of it, it's been 117 years. And as time passes, I think wounds also heal. As Secretary Mattis said in his remarks in Wyoming, all wars must come to an end. And perhaps it was just the right time.
In Balangiga, Eastern Samar, Trisha Terada, CNN Philippines.
Well, that was U.S. Press Attaché Molly Kashina talking to the media about the return of the bells. She did say, again, just to repeat some of what she said, it's time for the bells to come back because as Molly said, many people have actually been working for the return of the bells. Live pictures still from Villamor Air Base. The Balangiga bells already offloaded from the U.S. aircraft, a C-130 aircraft coming from Okinawa, Japan, the Kadena Air Base in Japan. Again, just to remind our viewers, those three bells were actually separated. Two were housed in the Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. After that, they were brought to Philadelphia for some restoration. And the third bell was actually housed in an air base in South Korea. All three bells were in Okinawa, Japan eventually and flown to the Philippines, specifically at the Villamor Air Base. And that should be the crate carrying the three Balangiga bells. Very historic, could be very sentimental for a number of people as well. People of Eastern Samar, Balangiga, also very excited. In fact, they were saying that they were more than happy, they were more than excited. It's as if it's an emotion that cannot be explained, even if no one of them really saw the Balangiga bells. It really is coming from their ancestors, stories being told from one generation to another that made these people realize how important the Balangiga bells are. Netizens also give their take on the return of the Balangiga bells. Cheska Buencamino tells us more.
The much-awaited return of Balangiga bells of Eastern Samar is finally happening. On social media, the homecoming of the historic bells are creating a lot of buzz. Here are some of them. On Facebook, Arnold Rocha thanked all veterans who worked hard for the return of the bells. Emilio Henares adds, the return of Balangiga bells symbolizes freedom from oppression. While for Darth_Ali on Twitter, this gesture means so much for the Filipino people. In the meantime, for @Chicky and Filet, the return of the Balangiga bells has to be the greatest Christmas gift to our heritage. Still on Twitterverse, for Alma Anona Scorpio, the Balangiga bells, which have been taken during the Filipino-American War, will soon be heard again ring throughout Samar. You can also join the conversation by tweeting us at CNN Philippines or by sending us a message on our official Facebook and Instagram accounts. Back to you.
The original home of these bells is the town of Balangiga in Eastern Samar. Our Trisha Terada is there to tell us about the ongoing preparations for this very special homecoming. Trisha.
Yes, Pick, you were actually at the viewing party at the St. Lawrence Parish here in Eastern Samar, where residents and descendants of Balangiga are actually watching live pictures of what's happening there at the Villamor Air Base. So though the box hasn't been opened yet and we haven't seen the actual bells yet, there's already a mix of emotions here at the viewing party. We've seen some tears of joy and big smiles upon these residents seeing the landing of the C-130 carrying the Balangiga bells, and the Balangiga bells being alighted from the C-130. And again, we're going to talk to some of the residents. Here we have Ma'am Conchita, who is a direct descendant of one of the warriors during the Balangiga War. Yes, ma'am, can you share with us yung feeling nyo po? Ano po yung pakiramdam upon seeing the bells being alighted earlier from the C-130? I saw you crying earlier.
Yes, we are very much overwhelmed, especially now that it has landed our Philippine soil. We are overwhelmed.
Ma'am, earlier you read something like the U.S. Claiming these bells as war trophies. What can you say about that, ma'am?
As if we do not believe and we cannot accept, because why did they say that they receive a trophy? In fact, as if it is vice versa. When you receive a trophy, that means to say you receive a reward. It should not be rewarded. Anyway, we just accept because we are already friends. Forget and forgive.
But right now, ma'am, how exactly are you feeling that especially in a few days you will be seeing the actual Balangiga bells? What difference does it make from you before just seeing it in pictures and from you just hearing it in stories from your grandfather? Is that
now we are very happy to see it actually. Before, as if we did not mind it anymore because we did not hear that it will be returned some days, some years. Now that it is already here in our Philippine soil, we are very much happy, very much overwhelmed.
Thank you, Nanay Conchita. Now let's go to Father Lentoy, who has been also very instrumental in the retrieving of the Balangiga bells. He wrote during his term as parish priest, or when he started his term as parish priest, he wrote a letter to the U.S. Explaining why the Balangiga bells should be brought back here to Eastern Samar. Father, how does it feel na ngayon po nakita nyo lumapag na yung C-130 carrying the box where the Balangiga bells are, Father?
We're very happy and excited. Like the others, I'm very excited to see what the bells, what the shape, the color, and also maybe the real, feelings.
Father, can see you're very teary-eyed right now. Why is that, Father? Do you really share? Do you share the emotions of the people here in Balangiga?
Yes, throughout my stay here as a parish priest for more than 3 years, I am one with them, so I understand what their feelings and what their need, really their longing for that bells.
Sir, how are the preparations coming along? We understand that from Friday it was moved to Saturday. How is the parish adjusting, and what can we expect as soon as the Balangiga bells arrive here?
Still, we stick our previous meetings with the committees, and there are little changes maybe tomorrow with the meetings of the PMS, but our preparation must go on even there's always changes, but still we stick our previous preparation, our previous meetings with regards for the preparations.
Thank you very much, Father. So that's the latest here, Pinky, at the St. Lawrence Parish in Eastern Samar. We now turn you over once again to the residents who are awaiting and seeing live pictures and a report on the unboxing of the Balangiga bells that's happening there at the Villamor Air Base. Pinky?
You can just begin to imagine the emotions being felt there right now by the residents of Balangiga, Eastern Samar. Maraming salamat sa iyo, Trisha Terada. We'll get more details from Trisha a little later on. As she mentioned, the residents there are intently watching. Live pictures coming from Villamor Air Base. We are seeing 2 crates right now. One already previously opened just a couple of minutes ago, a minute or 2, and the second one, they are attempting to open this second crate. Of course, we are anxiously awaiting to see exactly how they look like. We have to remember, of course, that this had to go through some restoration. Ambassador Babe Romualdez, the Philippine ambassador to the United States, said 2 of the bells that came from Wyoming had to make a stopover in Philadelphia. That is where some restoration work was done. Because the 2 bells in Wyoming, as we saw in earlier pictures, they were housed in a brick structure. The 2 bells were housed there in open air. From then on, brought to Wyoming. That was about November 14 in the United States, in Wyoming, I believe possibly November 15 here in the Philippines. And again, as we've mentioned a while ago, the 3rd one came from South Korea. Our David Santos continues to monitor the developments there at the Villamor Air Base. Let's speak to him, David.
Yes, thank you. Just add to what you've been explaining about the need for the 2 of the bells from Wyoming has to go to Philadelphia. Well, you're correct. No? You did explain yesterday that the 2 bells from Wyoming was placed for several years under a difficult climate, an open air memorial park, rather memorial. So it had to undergo some cleaning, restoration, and refurbishing. Also, it also had the measurements of those bells had to be taken as well, and its mold, why simply because we must remember that while the original bells would be brought to the Philippines, particularly to Samar, the replica of these bells will be produced also in Philadelphia, which will replace the original bells in the memorial inside the Air Force base in Wyoming. So that's the need why these bells had to go to Philadelphia before being shipped to Japan, then to Manila. Again, let me just point out that we cannot emphasize so much how historical this day, this event is for many of us, both for the U.S. and the Philippine governments. Just to point out, there's quite a number of journalists coming to cover this event, and generally when we have events here at the Air Force, usually the defense reporters are here, but this time we are seeing a lot of journalists, both from the Philippines and as well as international media, really interested to cover this particular event because of this. Of course, it has international implications as well. It also let me just also point out those who are here in the audience, in the grandstand, aside from the ranking officials from the Philippine government and the U.S. government, we are also seeing, aside from Air Force personnel, we are also seeing a lot of civilians. We understand some of them had actually come from Balangiga, Samar. Earlier, we saw some residents, one resident carrying a tarpaulin, expressing joy, pagbalik for the homecoming of the bells. We are also seeing a lot of chaplains from the different military units, from the Air Force, from the Navy, and the Army. You must remember that this is also, the Balangiga bells have also religious significance. So that explains perhaps the presence of the military chaplains here. Also, we also saw Monsignor Pedro Fitorio. We understand he is the former media director of the CDCP. He is also the head of the committee on the return of the Balangiga bells. So he's also here. And anytime now, we are expecting the ceremony to open once the crates have been opened.
Yeah, because of the formal turnover, there was a turnover in Wyoming, and now, of course, in the country, the turnover here. David, they're having a bit of a problem trying to open the other box. Nabuksan na yung una, and then the second box, from where I'm seeing it, possibly houses both the bells, but they're having a hard time trying to open the top part of the box. Siguro talagang it's very secure how this was packed in this crate in Okinawa.
Ito kasing dalawa, we are expecting, we are assuming, because we have to get official word for an explanation for that. The two bells which had come from Wyoming had to pass through Philadelphia. So malamang doon yan pinakage. Alam mo yung parang hindi na natin doon nilagay sa crate. I mean, so he has to travel for long hours. He had to come from Wyoming, from Philadelphia to the mainland United States. So, they needed to really secure this. But admittedly, it is somehow delaying the event, no? Medyo somehow awkward. Kasi ang dami na ng mga bisita natin who are still waiting here, mga high-profile guests as well as yung mga bisita na nandito ngayon nag-aabang. Originally, the schedule was to start at 11 o'clock.
Right. And finally, one is open, the second one is open, David. But more than that really is our excitement, everybody's excitement to see the actual bells. As you mentioned a while ago, we were talking about it in Wyoming. It was an open air. It was on a brick structure. But David, what is the plan from here on? Have they told you what will happen to the bells from here on? Will they be stationed here for a bit for some viewing open to the public? And how will this be transported to Balangiga in Eastern Samar? Any word on that?
Yes. Actually, there's no specific plans yet as of yesterday on what the bells, anong gagawin sa mga bells na to, no? Now they're handed over to the Philippine government. But what we know is eventually isasakay ito sa C-130 plane ng Philippine Air Force naman. Kasi once it is handed over, it comes under the Philippine control or ownership. So, ang sinasabi, ang schedule originally is either December 13 or 14, ilipat siya to Tacloban. But then again, papalit-palit, paiba-iba yung plano, yung schedule. So, nothing final as of yet. But what happens between now until perhaps it will be shipped or airlifted or rather transported to Tacloban, papuntang Balangiga, wala pa talagang klarong plano.
Yeah, the plans have been quite fluid, David. It's something you've been reporting, ilang araw na. In fact, we were expecting President Rodrigo Duterte to be present in today's ceremony, pero kahapon nga lumabas yung schedule, nagkapalit na, dapat what was supposed to be a 1:30 turnover ended up to be supposedly at 11 a.m. and the President will not make it. At si Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdea will be the one to represent the President. Pero ang sinabi naman, the turnover sa church on December 15, President Rodrigo Duterte will be there. He will be there to witness that.
Yes, Pinky. When word came out that eventually the bells are papunta na hearing from our friends at the DN, they were saying that originally wala talaga si President Duterte sa plano. Ang ceremony, handover ceremony, nakaschedule lang talaga si Secretary Lorenzana at saka yung counter or perhaps the representative ng U.S. government, which is Ambassador Song Kim. And a few days after that, lumabas na yung information that the President eventually will make it to the ceremony, but he will not give any speech. He will just witness the formal handover, pero wala siyang ibibigay na speech. You must remember that the President is also going to attend later today the change of command ceremony sa Camp Aguinaldo, also defense event. So, alam mo, nagkasama sila.
David, ayan na yung unang bell, nakikita na natin.
Yes, and we're actually, I don't know if you can hear from the background, or you can hear some people clapping and cheering with upon seeing those bells being taken out from the place. So, as you've been pointing out, there's an excitement, especially for residents of Balangiga, especially for residents of Samar. Napaka-special nito sa kanila because this is part of the history. Actually, this is part of our history, but especially for residents of Balangiga because ito nga, nangyari to sa kanilang lugar at mga kanuluan nila, yung mga forebearers nila, yung forefathers nila, ang naging parte nito, madugong history ito. So, to see this bell, this is an historical artifact. This is an evidence. This is a souvenir of that brutal, war period of our history. So, to see this actually now in person after 100 years, more than 100 years, is really, understandably, hindi lang siguro excited, kundi emotional din yung ating mga kababayan, especially dyan sa Balangiga.
Sabi mo na nga, David, kanununuan nila yung kanila mga lolo, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather. Sila yan eh. Kasi alam mo naman ang Pilipino, hindi ba? I mean, hindi lang siguro Pilipino, but anyone for that matter. You pass on stories from one generation to another. And some may call it a dark part of our history. Some will possibly just call it, history. Ayaw kasi nung iba sabihin na dark, ano? Pero ito yung mga kwento kasi na umabot from one generation to generation. At ngayon, nagpapatunay yung how real ay yung katotohanan nitong mga storya na kanilang naririnig lang mula sa kanilang mga ancestors.
Yes, in fact, in 1989, the government passed a law that marking a special day for September 28th, every September 28th of the year, they dedicate in remembrance of the Balangiga massacre. And we understand that residents of Balangiga have been holding theater plays in Balangiga during this day to reenact that particular time.
David, di ba that
so it's passed on from one generation to another.
Di ba dapat it was the 28th and then it was moved to the 30th, the commemoration? Tama
Parang
ba?
may ganun nga, Pinky, if I read it right, no? Parang may ganun, pero eventually parang, because it has to do with the availability of the residents participating in the ceremony, so nagkaroon ng change. But I'm not sure exactly kung tama ba 30th na, nilipat na sa 30th. But more importantly, Pinky, ang gusto natin sabihin din natin, no? I mean, the feedback that we're getting, speaking to whether you are a resident of Balangiga or whether you're just an ordinary Filipino witnessing this historical event, some would see this parang it's like opening old wounds. No? I mean, we must remember that as history tells, we were colonized by the Americans for about for 50 years. And siyempre, before tayo naging strongest ally in the region, naging adversaries din tayo.
Oo, nag-away din tayo.
So parang,
David, i-ano lang natin na ito na yung, I'm not sure if this is the second or the third bell being lifted from the crate. We're seeing this from the widescreen over there at the Villamor Air Base. And, this is something that the residents over there in Balangiga, which you can see on your screens, nagpapalakpakan na sila dahil nakikita nila yung katotohanan. They see it already arrived, in its, hindi naman flesh kasi wala sila dyan. Pero ito na yung kanilang siguro matagal nang inaasam-asam na maibalik. Kasi kung pag-usapan natin talaga yung history nito, as we mentioned a while ago, David, 1950s pa lang talagang hiningi na to ng isang Jesuit priest, no? Sa isang historian sa Amerika na umapila na ibalik na itong Balangiga Bell sa Pilipinas. Marami na ring effort, pero syempre ang isa sa mga naaalala natin is former President Fidel V. Ramos. Pero hindi nga nagkatotoo yun. Tapos pagkatapos niyan, fast forward na tayo to 2017, the State of the Nation Address of President Rodrigo Duterte, where he said, "Give us back the Balangiga Bells. They are ours." And to that effect, yung sinabi ni Pangulo noong 2017 State of the Nation Address.
Yes, alam mo, like I mentioned earlier, no, parehong bansa, may emotional attachment sa birth na ito as what historians have been saying on the part of the U.S. Government, siyempre yung mga veterans were saying, ito ay war trophy. Ito ay souvenir ng kanilang paghihiganti at pakikipaglaban sa mga napatay nilang mga kasamahan noon, particularly dyan sa Balangiga, 48 of them. On the side of the Philippine government, siyempre simbolismo ito, yung birth na ito, simbolismo nito yung pakikibasa ng ating mga kababayan laban sa pananakop ng Estados Unidos noong panahon na yon. So, understandably, parang may tug of war. Sabi mo na may tug of war on who kanino dapat mapunta ang birth na ito. But of course, dahil nang galing din ito sa simbahan natin, sa particularly dyan sa Balangiga, so napag-desisyon na eventually na ibalik na ito mga bells na ito. Alam mo, itong mga panahon na ito, parang it's also an opportunity for many of us, especially as Filipinos, to reflect on the importance of this historical event. Kasi siyempre we look back, bakit ba nangyari ito in the first place? Ito ba dahil lang isang incident lang? Anong ibig sabihin nito? We must remember that the Balangiga residents, particularly those who mga requesting for this bells. They were saying, kaya naman nangyari ito dahil pinaglalaban lang namin yung kalayaan namin. Dahil inambush namin yung mga colonizers namin, so that resulted to the death of the many American soldiers. The American troops also were saying they just suspended. Pinaglaban din nila yung mga napatay nila mga kasamahan, which eventually kung bakit nagkaroon din ng parang some sort of a counter-part massacre kasi nga ang report may mga hundreds and even thousands of Filipinos who died after that ambush.
Remember,
September 28, 1901. So again, alam mo, this is a moment of reflection also. It's very important, especially our young, the youth should be able to reflect on this, kung gaano ka-importante ito sa ating history because this defines who we are as Filipinos.
Sabi nga ng isang professor, si Professor Peñaranda David, it's really time that we face the truth about our history. At ang isa pang kinaganda daw nito ay it raises, inaangat ang consciousness nating lahat hinggil sa nangyari dyan sa Balangiga noong 1901. So David, babalikan ka namin a little later on in our special newscast this morning. Meantime, let's go to this. President Duterte earlier asked the United States to return the Balangiga bells to the Philippines. In his speech, the president looked back on the massacre that happened in that town in eastern Samar in 1901. He explained the Balangiga bells are important pieces of Philippine history.
The church bells of Balangiga were seized by the Americans as spoils of war. Those bells are reminders of the gallantry and heroism of our forebears who resisted the American colonizers and sacrificed their lives in the process. Give us back those Balangiga bells. They are ours. They belong to the Philippines. They are part of our national heritage.
A part of our national heritage, you are now seeing all three Balangiga bells over there at the runway at the Villamor Air Force, or Air Base rather, arriving from Okinawa in Japan. The three bells arrived aboard a C-130 plane, that's a U.S. military aircraft, at 10:30 in the morning. It took a while to offload these bells that were housed in a crate. Eventually, the crate had been opened, as we've shown you a couple of minutes ago, and now the three bells on display over there at the runway. United States Press Attaché Molly Kushina explains the importance of the return of the Balangiga bells to U.S.-Philippine relations. Let's listen to a portion of her statement yesterday.
Well, I think the breakthrough was Secretary Mattis and Secretary Lorenzana's meeting last October. Secretary Mattis reported that they spoke about, of course, U.S.-Philippine security cooperation and things we can do to further increase our cooperation on military issues. But of course the bells came up in that meeting. Later that same day, Secretary Mattis met with President Duterte. And in that meeting, Secretary Mattis committed to making it his personal sort of intent to do all he could to return the bells. So I think that perhaps is what you're looking for, is the turn of events. But of course the legal side of things is very important. There was a 90-day congressional notification. So on August 8th, Secretary Mattis notified Congress of his intent to, August 9th, Secretary Mattis notified Congress of his intent to return the bells. And there was a 90-day notification, and that was part of the 2000 National Defense Appropriations Act requirement. So it was mandated, that 90-day period, for anyone to raise their concerns or questions about the return. And then on November 14th, Secretary Mattis traveled to Wyoming, and Ambassador Babe Romualdez was there, and that's when the beginning of the Bell's return journey started. I couldn't speak to President Trump himself doing that. I know Secretary Mattis, with the president's support, has worked very hard to make this happen.
Again, the U.S. press attaché Molly Kushina telling us that apart from how we have told you that this happened even way back in the 1950s, asking for the return of the bells, it was former President Fidel V. Ramos who was also asking for the return of the Balangiga bells. But moving forward to what happened in 2017, as we've shown you, President Rodrigo Duterte, during his State of the Nation address, had asked for the return of the bells. And after that, there was a U.S. Defense Ministers meeting over in Clark, where U.S. Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana, together with U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis, had met. They talked about, as Molly was saying, security concerns, cooperation rather, between the Philippines and the United States. And then eventually, during that meeting, the talk about the Balangiga bells came up. And it was, again, let me just rephrase what Molly Kushina was saying, that the Secretary James Mattis had spoken to President Rodrigo Duterte that day during that U.S. Defense Ministers meeting in Clark, and had somehow committed to the return of the bells. What took a while was a law in the United States that for this to happen, there had to be a 90-day period of notification, which U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis had told the U.S. Congress. And after that 90-day period had lapsed, what we saw next was the post of the U.S. the Philippine U.S. ambassador to the United States, rather, Baby Romualdez, showing us that event in Wyoming where there was the turnover ceremony of the two Balangiga bells over there at the Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. So the turnover ceremony for the two bells, as I mentioned, of the three, was held in Wyoming last month, and it marked the beginning of the repatriation process. Philippine ambassador to the U.S., Baby Romualdez, was there, and also U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis. Ambassador Romualdez spoke to us here on CNN Philippines about the long journey home for the bells.
October of 2016, there was a defense ministers meeting in Clark Air Base where President Duterte met with Secretary Mattis, and that was one of the first points that he told Secretary Mattis at that time, that we would like to see those bells back in the Philippines. And Secretary Mattis very clearly said that we will do everything we can to ensure the return of those bells.
So those, the pictures that you saw together with Ambassador Baby Romualdez, those were the bells, again, in Wyoming, housed in a brick wall. Two of those were there, and the other one was housed in a U.S. base in South Korea. Romualdez also said the return of the bells is the right thing to do, and puts closure to the controversy between the two allies. Philippine Military Academy professor Sunny Busa, a former consul general with the U.S. State Department and a local of Eastern Samar, talks about the significance of returning the Balangiga bells. Speaking to CNN Philippines, Busa discussed the long process that the Philippines has gone through before the historic bells were brought home.
Well, it's a tremendous occasion. It's a very momentous occasion for U.S.-Philippine relations. And so when you say everyone, we're talking about the Americans and the Filipinos.
Absolutely.
For the Filipinos, it's a chance to reconnect with your history. And for the Americans, it's a chance to show that the U.S. is capable of doing the right thing, that justice will prevail, and it's also an affirmation of the strong ties between the U.S. and the Philippines. Now, you say it's been 117 years since the bells were taken, and now they're coming back. I like to refer it as the Balikbayan bells. You know, they're finally coming home after a 117-year vacation in the U.S.
Yeah.
And now they get to come home. But for the bells to come back now is just further indication and further symbol of how strong the U.S. and Philippine relationship is.
Right. Now,
there's been a whole process involved in getting the bells back. How did it all start?
Well, it all started, well, for me personally, it started in 1996 when President Ramos asked me to join a group of people who were going to mount a diplomatic offensive to get the bells back. Well, maybe offensive is the wrong word, but diplomatic effort to get it back. And so we thought that would work. That was back in 1996, and I was a consul at the American Embassy. And then, but you know, there were some legal problems, there were some attitude problems, there were some misunderstandings, and so it ultimately did not prosper. And so in the year 2000, there was a group of academicians led by Dr. Rolando Boranaga and Bob Cootie, who started writing about the bells, so to create a public awareness of what this all meant, because the main objection to the bells was the myths and misunderstandings of what this all meant, what the bells meant. And so we're slowly chipping away about the understanding. And then now, a group led by what I call the 4 American veteran sailors, that's Henry Howard, Dan McKinnon, Brian Bozell, Dennis Wright. They said, wait a minute, you're approaching it wrong. Because there was a law in the books prohibiting the bells from coming back.
Right. So it would have been useless anyway, at that point, no matter what you said or did or whatever diplomatic efforts you made, there was a law.
Yeah, there was a law. Okay, so, but that law expired in 2016. So that gave us the opening. Now the law expires in 2016. Now what do we do?
Now you can have a real conversation.
Now we can have a real conversation. So do we have a new law? Yes.
Okay.
And so the group led by Henry Howard and the others I mentioned said, listen, the way to approach this is through legislative means. Go to the senators and the congressmen, because that's the ultimate point, the ultimate fulcrum of power. And so in the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. The NDAA is the legislation which provides the money for the U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force. How many millions of dollars is that? The U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force? And so, but within the NDAA, we were able to have a rider attached that says that the Secretary of Defense now has the authority to...
Let's now turn over to the ceremony at the Villamor Air Base.
Secretary Delphine N. Lorenzana and his wife, Mrs. Edith Lorenzana. United States Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Sung Yong Kim. Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdea. U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for South and Southeast Asia, Dr. Joseph H. Felter. Philippine Ambassador to the United States, His Excellency Jose Manuel Romualdez. Secretary Salvador Panelo. Secretary Martin Andanar. Members of the Philippine Senate present, Senator Richard Gordon and Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel Jr. and his wife. May I also acknowledge former Senator Aquilino S. Pimentel Sr. Members of the House of Representatives present. We have here Congressman Leopoldo N. Batawil of Pangasinan and Congressman Benevard Done of Eastern Samar. Officials of the Department of National Defense led by Undersecretary Carolina. Officials from other government agencies present. May I also greet Admiral Philip S. Davidson, Commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and the members of the U.S. Armed Forces present. May I make special mention of the pilots and crew of the USC-130 Philippine Air Force, U.S. Air Force, that brought the bells to Manila, officers, men and women of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, led by Lieutenant General Galileo Gerard Quintanar, Commanding General, Philippine Air Force, Vice Admiral Robert M. Pedrad, Flag Officer in Command, Philippine Navy, Major General Robert Arevalo, Vice Commander, Philippine Army, and Major General Restituto Badilla Jr. of the General Headquarters, Armed Forces of the Philippines. Residents of Samar, led by Congressman Raul Daza and family. Other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Today, we shall witness an historic event unfold before our very eyes. As such, it is my honor to welcome you all to Colonel Jesus Villamor Air Base for the handover ceremony of the Balangiga bells from the United States Department of Defense to the Department of National Defense of the Philippines. We are all aware that these 3 Balangiga bells were taken from the town of Balangiga and brought to the United States by American soldiers during the Philippine-American War in 1901. If we briefly go through the history of the efforts that led to today's ceremony, it can be recalled that defense secretaries, historians, legislators, priests, bishops, concerned citizens, and no less than presidents of both countries have made various initiatives to return the bells to the country. Present this morning are the individuals and representatives from the various organizations and agencies who have worked hard over the years to try and bring the bells back home. Let us all give them a round of applause, please. President Rodrigo Roa Duterte once again brought the issue of the bells to the fore in his 2017 State of the Nation address. Finally, after over more than half a century's worth of initiatives through the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act of 2018, signed by President Donald J. Trump, U.S. Defense Secretary James N. Mattis began the process of returning the Balangiga bells to the Philippines. This was a result of high-level bilateral talks between Secretary Mattis and Secretary of National Defense Delfin N. Lorenzana, following the pronouncement of President Rodrigo Duterte in his 2017 State of the Nation address. The return of the Balangiga bells was made possible through the efforts of both the Filipinos and the Americans. It is but a fitting closure to the very unfortunate chapter of our shared histories as allies, working together to defend our common interests. In a few days' time, the 3 bells will finally return home to their church in Balangiga, Eastern Samar, where it will be welcomed by the people of that town, just in time for the start of the Filipino tradition of Simbang Gabi or Dawn Masses. After 117 years, the sound of the bells will once again ring, not only for the local parish in Balangiga, but for all Filipinos across the globe. Today, the bells are back in Philippine soil, and we are all witnesses to this momentous event. As Defense Secretary Delfin N. Lorenzana received the bells on behalf of the Department of National Defense from the U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Sung Yom Kim. Once again, Welcome and God bless us all.
Thank you, sir. May we request everyone to focus your attention on the screen for an audio-visual presentation on the history of the Balangiga bells, prepared by the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and the DND Public Affairs Office.
The Balangiga bells have evoked conflicting sentiments among Filipinos and Americans. This is due to an unfortunate incident that happened in the town of Balangiga during the Filipino-American War. But time, as they say, heals all wounds and changes circumstances. Former enemies are now friends. Americans and Filipinos have since become staunch allies, fighting and standing shoulder to shoulder in nearly all wars and battles throughout history. They stood as brothers in the battlefields of Bataan, Corregidor, and the Korean Peninsula, and helped each other in Vietnam and other places across the globe. This ironclad friendship makes both nations stronger in the continuing fight against terrorism and violent extremism, ensuring the security and stability of the Asia-Pacific region. As both nations moved forward, several efforts to return the Balangiga bells were initiated by both sides. In 1958, Father Horacio de la Costa wrote to American military historian Chip Wards, seeking help in the return of the bells that were then in the possession of the U.S. Air Force. This request was followed up a year later by American Franciscan priests of Gihulngan Negros Oriental. In 1989, the Balangiga Historical Society, through the National Historical Institute and the Department of Foreign Affairs, petitioned the U.S. government for the return of the town's church bells. The following year, Philippine Defense Secretary Fidel V. Ramos and U.S. Defense Secretary and former Wyoming Congressman Dick Cheney commenced negotiations for the bells' return. When Fidel Ramos became president, he proposed a one original, one replica sharing formula of the bells to appease both Filipino and American sentiments. Over the years, various organizations worked hard for the return of the bells, including the U.S. Philippine Society based in the United States, led by Henry Howard. The advocacy was shared by several veterans organizations and individuals, Filipinos and Americans alike. The importance of the bells were once again brought to fore by President Rodrigo Roa Duterte during his 2017 State of the Nation address. And so, after more than half a century's worth of initiatives, U.S. President Donald Trump signed the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act of 2018, authorizing Defense Secretary James Mattis to decide on the matter of returning the Balangiga bells to the Philippines. Immediately, bilateral talks between Secretary Mattis and Philippine Secretary of National Defense Delfin Lorenzana followed.
History teaches us that nations with allies thrive. With allies thrive. And it reminds us too, history reminds us that all wars end. In returning the bells of Balangiga to our ally and our friend, the Philippines, we pick up our generation's responsibility to deepen the respect between our peoples, linking the Western people of the great state of Wyoming with people in Eastern Philippines.
Finally, after 117 years, the Balangiga bells, which are important icons of Filipino heritage and identity, are on their way home to Balangiga, where they truly belong. After serving as grim reminders of violence, hatred, and division, the Balangiga bells shall henceforth toll for all humanity as symbols of peace, hope, and friendship.
We shall now proceed to the handover ceremony. May we request our honored guests, Secretary Delfin and Lorenzana and U.S. Ambassador Sung Wai Kim for the inspection of the Balangiga bells downstage. May we also invite Executive Secretary Salvador Medaldea, Ambassador Jose Manuel Romualdez, Deputy Assistant Secretary Dr. Joseph Falter, Yusek Reynaldo Mapago, and other VVIPs to join in the inspection.
May we request all the principals to please stand behind the bells for the photo opportunity.
Ito na siguro yung pagkakataon na nakalapit ang mga opisyal both from the United States and the Philippines dito sa Balangiga Bells mula nang lumapag dyan sa Villamor Air Base dakong 10:30 ng umaga. Ang nakikita nyo ngayon ay mga miyembro ng gabinete ni Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, gayon din ilang mga senador, congressman, at syempre ang magkabilang ambassador, U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines at Philippine Ambassador to the United States, si U.S. Ambassador Sung Kim at si Philippine Ambassador to the United States na si Babe Romualdez. Nakikita nyo rin si Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana, sa gawang kaliwa si dating Senate President Coco Pimentel, si Presidential Spokesperson at Chief Presidential Legal Counsel Salvador Panelo. Ngayon ay ini-inspect na at nahawakan na ang mga Balangiga Bells dahil mula nang lumapag yan dyan sa Villamor Air Base ay sakay-sakay po yan ng isang crate na in-offload sa isang C-130 US military plane. Hindi ho nakalapit pa itong mga opisyal dyan sa Balangiga Bells at mula nang ma-offload at binuksan ng crate na medyo nagtagal din po, ay dinisplay na dyan sa parang platform na kulay pula ang tatlong Balangiga Bells. At dyan na po nagkaroon ng pagkakataon ng mga opisyal na makalapit, ma-inspect at isang photo opportunity ngayon ay nagaganap. Magpapatuloy po ang tinatawag na handover ceremony dyan sa Balangiga Bells. Inaasahan din ang isang speech mula kay Secretary Delfin Lorenzana, gayon din kay U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Sung Kim. Aantabayanan po natin kung anong kanilang sasabihin hinggil sa pagbalik ng Balangiga Bells. It's finally home, ika nga. After 117 years back in Philippine soil, ang ating pong reporter na si senior correspondent na si David Santos nariyan po sa Villamor Air Base at patuloy na ina-update tayo hinggil sa mga kaganapan dyan. At isa pa po ating reporter na si Trisha Terada nandun naman po sa Balangiga Town sa Eastern Samar para kunin ang reaksyon ng mga residente doon sa Balangiga. So patuloy po nating aalamin ang latest dyan sa Villamor Air Base. Samantala, alright, so for more than a century, two of the Balangiga Bells have been on U.S. soil and another one in South Korea. Today, they're all home. This is a CNN Philippines special presentation. This is a special presentation of CNN Philippines on the return of the Balangiga Bells. Live pictures, of course, from the Villamor Air Base. We are expecting the handover ceremony to continue after a brief inspection by some members of the Duterte cabinet secretaries of President Rodrigo Duterte, together with U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Song Kim, and Philippine Ambassador to the U.S., Babe Romualdez, also U.S. Philippine Defense Secretary, Delphine Lorenzana. Let's go back to the ceremony.
Please be seated. At this point, may we request the U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Ambassador Sung Wai Kim, to give his message.
Magandang hapon. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. It is a tremendous honor for me to be a part of this historic occasion. I'm proud and grateful to be joined by Executive Secretary Maria Dea, Defense Secretary Lorenzana, Ambassador Romualdez, and outstanding leaders of the armed forces of the Philippines. I'm also very happy to see so many distinguished friends, including senators and congresspeople, to witness this historic event. We have two very special guests from the United States who traveled all the way here for this momentous event. Indo-PACOM Commander Admiral Davison and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Joe Felter. Welcome. We're gathered to welcome the return of the bells of Balangiga to the Philippines people. It has been a long road home. Many Filipinos and Americans worked tirelessly for decades to make today possible. I'm so glad many of them are here today, including my friends Henry, Dennis, and Joe. Since President Ramos first raised the issue of bells with President Clinton in 1993, virtually every Philippine president has pressed for the bells return. As the video we just saw reminds us, President Duterte made a forceful appeal for the bells return during his 2017 State of the Nation address. I was there and heard his passionate call loud and clear. President Duterte followed up with a personal appeal to our Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, who, like all of us here today, recognized that returning the bells is the right thing to do, and that by returning the bells, the U.S. could restore to its friend and ally an important symbol of national independence, and also demonstrate our commitment to a relationship of two sovereign nations, two equal partners, and mutual respect. The bells before us are the original bells that hung in Balangiga, San Lorenzo de Martir Church. The history of these bells spans the entire relationship between the United States and the Philippines. And in the process, they have touched many lives. And their return underscores the enduring friendship between our countries, our shared values, and shared sacrifices. This solemn ceremony reminds us of the many brave Filipinos and Americans who fought for freedom. In 1901, our two countries were adversaries. That painful conflict soon ended, and our countries became partners and friends. We fought together for freedom and to protect democratic values across the Indo-Pacific region. In World War II and in Korea, our soldiers fought, bled, died, and sacrificed side by side. Together, they made possible the peace and prosperity that we enjoy today. I recently had the privilege of awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to 40 brave Filipino veterans of World War II. It was truly inspiring to hear about their courage, commitment, and sacrifice. And thanking them in person was a deeply moving experience for me, and in a sense, an appropriate prelude to today's ceremony. The return of the bells lets us reflect on the U.S.-Philippines relationship, where we have been, where we are, and where we are going. Having now served as over 2 years as U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, I can tell you with great confidence that our relationship remains ironclad, consecrated by the service and sacrifice of Americans and Filipinos who fought side by side. Our shared history is enduring and deeply personal. Our relationship has withstood the tests of history and flourishes today. And every day, our relationship is further strengthened by our unbreakable alliance, robust economic partnership, and deep people-to-people ties. So on behalf of the United States, it is my great honor to be here at this closing of a painful chapter in our history. The Bell's return reflects the strong bonds and mutual respect between our two nations and our peoples. It demonstrates our determination to honor the past and the sacrifices made together by Filipinos and Americans. And it heralds a bright future as friends, partners, and allies. The Bells of Balangiga are now home in the Philippines where they belong. Secretary Lorenzana, please take them to the people of Balangiga and to the Church of San Lorenzo. May they ring in peace and bear testament to the ties and values which bind our two great nations for generations to come. Thank you very much. Salamat po.
Thank you, sir. The Secretary of National Defense, Secretary Dolphin and Lorenzana, will now give his remarks.
Executive Secretary Salvador Medel Dia, Ambassador Song Yong Kim, Dr. Joseph Felter, who accompanied the Bell from Cadena Air Force Base to here this morning, Ambassador Raul Rabe and Mrs. Maria Buena Rabe, Ambassador Jose Manuel Romualdez, our ambassador to the United States, former Senate President Aquilino Nene Pimentel and Mrs. Lourdes Pimentel, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel, and Mrs. Katrina Yu Pimentel, Senator Dick Gordon, Rear Admiral Philip Davidson, Commander of Indo-PACOM, Lieutenant General Galileo Quintanar, Commanding General of the Philippine Air Force, and other AFP officials here, Undersecretary Mapago, the President of the Veterans Federation of the Philippines, Judge Mamaran, is here. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. One cannot imagine the great joy that the return of the Balangiga bells brings to the Filipino people. The Filipinos, especially those from Samar, welcome this occasion. Finally, after 117 years, the bells of Balangiga are coming home, are home actually, and will once again take their place at the Balangiga Church. This is the most memorable day in our nation's history, and we celebrate it with deep gratitude and respect for all those who helped to make this day happen. Now, it was shown in the video presentation that the start was in 1958, but it goes all the way to 1935 by no less than the leader of the band that attacked the Americans in Balangiga, Eugenio Daza. I think he wrote a paper urging our government to request the return of the bells. And he is represented by his great-grandson here. Roy, where are you? Yeah. Eugenio Roy Daza, the grandson of... and we also have here Congressman Raul Daza of Samar. I think the great nephew of Eugenio Daza. So when I was in the United States, I saw a lot of people who work for the bells, and some of them are here. Let me recognize Dennis Wright, Brian Bosel, there, and this is a triumvirate actually. Brian, Dennis, and Dan McKinnon, who served in the Philippines as a young lieutenant, young ensign, worked hard for this. And also here is Bill Bunnigan, one of the columnists of Manila Mail, who has been writing about the bells. But of course, the person who made the most, or who give the most effort, is Henry Howard here. Please stand up, Henry. He was the one who lobbied for the inclusion of the return of the bells in 2018 in the AA. And he also spent for the transportation of the bells from Wyoming to Philadelphia, and also for the refurbishment. Thank you very much, Henry. How these bells ended up in the F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming and in South Korea after the 1901 event has become common knowledge and readily accessible in the internet. Therefore, there is no need to belabor or to argue who was wrong and who was right. But it is safe to say that these bells have come to symbolize a painful episode in the history of both the Philippines and the United States. How could mere 3 bells, church bells, evoke so much intense emotion among Filipinos and Americans? Maybe because we human beings live by symbols such as our national flag, and in this instance, these bells. It is a symbol of our unity, of our identity, of ourselves. These bells came to symbolize something precious and important to both sides. They symbolize the courage and patriotism of the soldiers whose acts they would like to perpetuate with these bells. And now they are home. And they are going back to where they belong. It's time for healing. It is time for closure. It is time to look ahead as two nations should, with shared history and as allies. When Secretary Jim Mattis and several others, including Henry Howard and Joe Filter, went to Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming to get the bells, he delivered a beautiful speech, and I am quoting a part of it. He said, "To those who think that we are losing something by returning the bells, please hear me out when I say that the bells mark time, but courage is timeless. It does not fade in history in dimly lit corridors, nor is it forgotten in the history of conflict." End of quote. I understand that replicas of the bells were forged, and these replicas will be brought back to F.E. Warren Air Force Base and Camp Red Cloud in South Korea to serve as memorials. Once these originals in us and the replicas reach their destinations, it is our hope that closure would have been achieved. It is our hope that they will no longer remind us of that painful episode of our joint history. Instead, let them serve as memorials to those soldiers who fought valiantly for their country. The bells of Balangiga will once again peal. They will still remind the people of Balangiga of what happened in the town square more than a century ago. But they would also look at that history with more understanding and acceptance. These peals will be of joy, revelry, and remembrance, of shared histories and ideals, of new beginnings, of renewed friendships, and a stronger bond of two nations who have surmounted past challenges together, and together are ready to face the future. Let the bells toll strong and loud for our countries. God bless the Philippines. God bless America. God bless us all. Thank you, and mabuhay.
Thank you, sir. That concludes the handover ceremony of the Balangiga bells. We thank you all for witnessing this momentous event in our history. Maraming salamat at mabuhay tayong lahat.
invite our guests to proceed at the MIP Lounge for some refreshments. Thank you.
That concludes the handover ceremony at the Villamor Air Base. We heard speeches from two gentlemen, Ambassador Song Kim and Secretary Delphine Lorenzana. Very obvious in the speech of both gentlemen, saying both the bells need to be rung. Let the bells toll loud. Ambassador Song Kim also saying it was the right thing to do to return the Balangiga bells to the Philippines. He even said that they're home. And he went on to say that he told Secretary Delphine Lorenzana to bring them to the church in Balangiga and let them ring. It's a symbol of an important symbol of independence, and it actually shows mutual respects. And he even says it underscores the enduring friendship between the U.S. and the Philippines. He called it once adversaries and now partners and friends. Secretary Delphine Lorenzana responded to that and said this is a new beginning, a strong bond for both countries, and in fact a time for healing, closure, and a time to look ahead. This is, he says, a most memorable day. And he did thank those present today at the Villamor Air Base who helped to try to bring home the bells. Indeed, he said, the bells are home. Our David Santos is at the Villamor Air Base, and we will be speaking to him. David. We'll get back to David Santos in a little while. Our correspondent Trisha Terada also in Balangiga in Eastern Samar to get the more reactions from the residents over there. United States Ambassador to the Philippines, Song Kim, says that many Americans and Filipinos worked hand in hand for the return of the Balangiga bells. He also insists that the move to return the historic bells is the right thing to do. Let's again listen to a portion of the speech of Ambassador Kim.
It is a tremendous honor for me to be a part of this historic occasion. I'm proud and grateful to be joined by Executive Secretary Medialdea, Defense Secretary Lorenzana, Ambassador Romualdez, and outstanding leaders of the armed forces of the Philippines. I'm also very happy to see so many distinguished friends, including senators and congresspeople, to witness this historic event. We have two very special guests from the United States who traveled all the way here for this momentous event. Indo-PACOM Commander Admiral Davidson and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Joe Felcher. Welcome. We're gathered to welcome the return of the bells of Balangiga to the Philippines people. It has been a long road home. Many Filipinos and Americans worked tirelessly for decades to make today possible. I'm so glad many of them are here today, including my friends Henry, Dennis, and Joe. Since President Ramos first raised the issue of bells with President Clinton in 1993, virtually every Philippine president has pressed for the bells' return. As the video we just saw reminds us, President Duterte made a forceful appeal for the bells' return during his 2017 State of the Nation address. I was there and heard his passionate call loud and clear. President Duterte followed up with a personal appeal to our Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, who, like all of us here today, recognized that returning the bells is the right thing to do, and that by returning the bells, the U.S. could restore to its friend and ally an important symbol of national independence, and also demonstrate our commitment to a relationship of two sides.
President Rodrigo Duterte was demanding that the U.S. return the Balangiga bells to the Philippines. How important are these bells to our national heritage? Watch this.
Give us back those Balangiga bells. They are ours. They belong to the Philippines. They are part of our national heritage. are reminders of the gallantry and heroism of our forebears, who resisted the American colonizers and sacrificed their lives in the process.
And that wraps up our special presentation of the return of the Balangiga bells. I'm Pinky Webb. Thank you for watching.
This program is brought to you by Bank of Commerce, an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation.
This is a special edition of Newsnight where we go above and beyond the headlines. I'm Pia Ontiveros. The Americans took them as war trophies more than a century ago, and now the Balangiga bells are back on Philippine soil. It was indeed a long and at times bumpy road home. A moment now part of history, the Balangiga bells finally back in the country after more than a century since they were taken by American soldiers as war booty. The United States says returning the bells is just the right thing to do. Our senior correspondent David Santos tells us more.
On board a C-130 plane that carried the emblem of a U.S. general familiar to many Filipinos, the Balangiga bells, just like Douglas MacArthur during the Japanese occupation, they have returned. Americans seized them as war booty, and more than a century since then, the bells are a step closer to where they should belong. For most descendants of the Balangiga uprising in 1901, seeing the bells up close and personal for the first time is a moving experience.
It is a very emotional journey, and I always cry every time.
Dolores Matias is a great-granddaughter of Pedro Abayan, then Balangiga's El Presidente del Pueblo or town mayor, and among those who led the attack against the American forces.
And those peaceful town people took part in that very gruesome rebellion. I even couldn't believe that my grandfather, who was a very religious man, could be there, could wield a bolo, and maybe took a life.
The negotiation for the bells' return took about half a century. President Duterte has been vocal about his anti-U.S. sentiments and demanded last year that Washington give back the bells. And so it did. The U.S. passed a law this year clearing legal obstacles for the bells' return. Then the Trump administration facilitated it, despite some opposition.
I don't see any real opposition to the return of the bells, and I think, there were just some people making a lot of noise.
U.S. officials, however, insist things fell into place to have the bells returned, and it was just the right thing to do.
It's really much more than just one president or one request or one demand. I mean, this is something that many people have worked on for a very long time.
This is a gesture that we hope is viewed positively as an investment in this relationship in our alliance.
Historians say both the Philippines and U.S. have emotional attachment to the bells. These have many symbolisms representing each country's struggle and interests.
It is our hope that they will no longer remind us of that painful episode of our joint history. Instead, let them serve as memorials to those soldiers who fought valiantly for their country.
Before these are transported to Samar, the public can view the Balangiga bells at the Air Force Museum here inside the Villamor Air Base. David Santos, CNN Philippines.
The return of the Balangiga bells, a hot topic on social media. Here's our Cheska Buencamino for more.
The much-awaited return of Balangiga bells of Eastern Samar is finally happening. On social media, the homecoming of the historic bells are creating a lot of buzz. Here are some of them. On Facebook, Arnold Rocha thanked all veterans who worked hard for the return of the bells. Emilio Henares adds, the return of Balangiga bells symbolizes freedom from oppression. While for Darth_Ali on Twitter, this gesture means so much for the Filipino people. In the meantime, for @Chicky_and_Filet, the return of the Balangiga bells has to be the greatest Christmas gift to our heritage. Still on Twitterverse, for Alma Anona Scorpio, the Balangiga bells, which have been taken during the Filipino-American War, will soon be heard again ring throughout Samar. You can also join the conversation by tweeting us at CNN Philippines or by sending us a message on our official Facebook and Instagram accounts. Back to you.
Joining us via Skype, Molly Koshina. She is the U.S. Embassy Press Attaché. Molly, thank you very much for joining us now.
You're so welcome.
Molly, can we begin with this? Although the Ambassador Sung Kim, did refer to it, he was saying that it wasn't just one demand or one statement or one press release from any one official of the Republic of the Philippines, right? This is the result of decades, even years of work, very hard work by many people in the background, correct?
Absolutely. Government officials, president, secretary, philanthropists, and all been working on it. I believe President Ramos raised it with President Clinton in 1990.
All right, we're going to try and get a better line to Molly in just a bit. We're going to fix that line with you. Molly, we will be right back with you. This is a special presentation of Newsnight where we go above and beyond the headlines, what the return of the bells mean to the people of Balangiga in Eastern Samar. When we come back. This is a special edition of Newsnight. Welcome back. Residents of Balangiga town in Eastern Samar are celebrating the return of the bells as descendants of Balangiga, the town's warriors, share what this means to them. Our Trisha Terada joins us live from the town. Trisha, tell us how locals feel about this historic event.
Well, Pia, Balangiga residents are overwhelmed with joy upon the arrival of the bells in Manila. They're even more excited to hear them ring for the first time after 117 years when these reached their town on Saturday. To many residents and descendants, the occasion is like an early Christmas gift. Residents and descendants of Balangiga warriors cheer and applaud the arrival of the Balangiga bells at Villamor Air Base in Pasay City. They could not hold back tears of joy as they see the bells land and taken out of the crates. They were in the hands of Americans for more than a century as trophies from the Philippine-American War.
Just learning that it is already in our land, the Philippine soil. Naku. We are already... We feel it in our hearts and in our skins, in our body, whole body.
Kanina nanonood kami sa TV. We were looking at the footage doon sa Villamor Air Base. Sabi, iba pala yung feeling pag para bang may ino-open kami na regalo sa Christmas.
Conchita Balaisa's grandfather was a warrior during the Balangiga massacre. She is against branding the bells as war trophies.
When you receive a trophy, that means to say you receive a reward. It should not be rewarded. Anyway, we just accept because we are already friends. Forget and forgive.
Fe Campanero, a descendant of Kashana Nacionales, a Katipunera and female warrior of Balangiga, recalls the strength and resilience of her great-grand-aunt during the war. She says Nacionales was the only female warrior at that time.
Siya ay nag-participate doon sa planning itself. She came out from the church. As the bells were rung, she waved the rosary beads to signal the attack.
Eulohia Abanador Amano is a grandniece of Balangiga's hero, Valeriano Abanador. He was the police chief who led the attack against the Americans over 100 years ago. But she vividly recalls her lolo Bali refuses to talk about it. 80-year-old Eulohia can't wait to finally hear the bells ring.
My grand-uncle, Valeriano, was one of those solicitors for the gold to be mixed with the other minerals, elements in in shaping the bells. That's why the sound of the bells are really, the sound of the bells is really beautiful.
The bells, just like to many other descendants, mean a lot to her.
They're important because they remind us of the patriotism of our forebears. They wanted to defend the town from, say, tyranny of invaders.
For the descendants, the return of the bells in Balangiga on December 15th signals closure of a dark yet victorious past.
Mabagting manta ang lingganay, paglaumla minahal nga balanhiga. Meaning to say, someday the bells will ring again. So just hope, Balangiga. Just hope, dear Balangiga.
Well, Pia, once the Balangiga bells arrive here on Saturday, it will be open for public viewing before it's going to be put back in its belfry. Now, the church that you can see behind me is actually just right across the monument of the Balangiga warriors. It's showing the encounter that happened in 1901. This also it's also a reminder for the residents here of the contribution that they had for the town. This also give tourists and residents as well a glimpse of what actually transpired during the 1901 attack. And actually, upon hearing the news that the bells have finally arrived in Manila, some tourists and even residents flock here to the monument, taking selfies and pictures just before the influx of the tourists arrive here once the bells are finally back in its hometown. Pia?
Trisha Terada reporting there live from Balangiga in Eastern Samar. Joining us now on the phone again, Molly Kushina. She is the press attaché of the U.S. Embassy here in Manila. Molly, thank you again for being patient with us. Well, I was asking you earlier if the return of the bells of Balangiga today is just the result of one statement or one demand or one press release from any one official. And you were saying that this is a result of years, decades of very hard work, especially in the background, by very many different people.
Absolutely, that is correct. There are historians and philanthropists, in addition to diplomats, secretaries of defense, and presidents. I believe President Ramos was the first to bring it up to President Clinton in 1993. So as you can see, that's been years and years of effort by many different people.
And there is a law, please help us understand this. There is a law that emanated from the U.S. House of Representatives, 2810, is that correct? That was introduced just this past June or early July that allowed the return of the bells, is that correct?
Correct. That was the National Defense Authorization Act, and Secretary Mattis, after having met with Secretary Lorenzana and President Duterte when he came to the Philippines for the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, introduced language so that the bells could be returned. So there were many, many steps in the process to ensure the safe return of the bells to the Philippines.
So that law was introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives in early June or early July. And then that was because President Duterte mentioned it in his State of the Nation address last year, correct? So I'm just trying to get the chronological order.
Sure. I am not sure when exactly President Duterte mentioned it in his State of the Nation.
That is July, late July 2017.
2017.
Yes.
Well, Secretary Mattis met with Secretary Lorenzana and President Duterte in November of 2017. So a year ago last month, correct?
All right.
And so that was really the turning point, I believe.
Yeah. Okay, so just a bit of the details now of this law. There is a section there, Section 2864, entitled Modification of Prohibition on Transfer of Veterans' Memorial Objects to Foreign Governments Without Specific Authorization in Law. So the bells are considered veterans' memorial objects because American war veterans, the veterans of the U.S.-Philippine War, this was back in 1901, took the bells with them and brought them back to the U.S., and therefore they were considered veterans' memorial objects, correct?
Well, and the bells in Wyoming have been part of a memorial to U.S. service members who lost their lives. So the bells themselves were placed in a memorial that was remembering lives lost. So yes, they made up part of that memorial.
Yeah. Molly, in the last few years, many historians would talk about why the American forces at that time would take church bells. And it wasn't just the Balangiga bells, there were many others. But and their explanation was that American forces wanted to prevent Filipino soldiers from melting the bells and turning them into, like, well, cannonballs, for example, or things that could be turned into weapons to be used against the U.S. forces. Is that correct?
I've read the same reports you had. I've read the same historian guesses, but at the same time, none of us were there, so we really couldn't speak authoritatively to that.
Yeah, all right, okay. There were other bells that were returned, at least one other bell, but I'm going to ask that of an historian that we're going to speak to in a while. But are there other bells that you know of, that the U.S. Embassy in Manila knows of, that came from different churches here in the Philippines and were brought back to the U.S. or any other base of the United States military in any other part of the world?
I'm unaware of any, although I do really want to emphasize that bringing back the Balangiga bells really is just out of respect for our friendship, our partnership, and alliance that we have with the Philippines. And I think it's exactly what should have happened, and it's right. It's the right thing to do. So I'm definitely very honored and very proud to be part of a very small part of the return of the bells.
Have you, or well, anyone in the U.S. Embassy or the U.S. State Department have been in touch with any of the the heirs or the descendants of the American soldiers who died in Balangiga back in 1901? I mean, was there any communication in that regard?
Absolutely. The process of deciding the return of the bells, it included extensive conversations with not only lawmakers, but veterans associations. So there were many, actually years of back and forth and consideration for respect for the veterans and, again, the people whose lives were lost.
Final words, Molly?
We are so proud to have turned the bells over to the Philippine government today, and we look forward to the upcoming ceremony when the bells make it all the way back to Samar and are returned to the people of Balangiga. And we all look forward to the bells ringing in peace and celebration of our friendship, partnership, and alliance with the Philippine government. And
we look forward to that too on Saturday when the bells will ring finally again in the church of Balangiga in Eastern Samar. This was a good day today. Molly, Kushina, thank you very much for joining us this evening. When we return, we'll talk more about the Balangiga bells and their importance to our national heritage. This is Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines. Welcome back. This is a special edition of Newsnight. We now speak to Rolando Borinaga, a historian and secretary of the National Committee on Historical Research of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Professor, thank you very much, or Doctor, thank you very much for joining us this evening. So can we begin with this? The bells were taken by the American forces in 1901 in yes, because they wanted to prevent the Filipino soldiers from melting them and turning them into weapons to be used against the American forces. Is that correct? I mean, among the many other reasons, like they wanted to bring it home as a reward or war booty or a trophy.
Well, essentially that was one of the key reasons. But actually, what happened was that
Sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Sir, can you hear me? You are
yes,
live
sir.
On air.
Okay.
Go ahead, please, sir.
What really happened was that Balangiga was already burned by the U.S. military at Balangiga Church, and the bells parang that's part of the ruins. So kinuha na lang nila kasi sunog na yung simbahan.
Yes po, sir. We know that po, that was part of the report earlier. My question po is the reason for taking the bells, or for, well, whatever word you would like to use, to confiscate or to take by the American forces, is to prevent, is that correct? To prevent Filipino soldiers at that time from turning, from melting the bells and turning them into war material or weaponry that could be used against the U.S. forces at that time?
That was actually one of the first reasons why the Americans tried to confiscate the bells, so that the Filipino revolutionary forces would not turn them into bullets or weapons. That was one of the reasons. Pero that got lost in history. Hindi na yun that did not actually surface again until in recent years. Why the bells were taken.
In other words, had the American forces left those bells, the bells could have been melted and used against them, sir.
They could have been melted against into weapons and bullets against the U.S. forces, but that's why the U.S. forces took them. But according to military regulations of the period, after the war,
they should have been returned.
They should have been returned.
All right. In other words,
those were private property.
In other words, all right, during the war, while the war is going on, they can keep it, but then at the end of the war, kailangan binalik sana. Pero ang nangyari, one of the bells was brought to South Korea, the other two were brought to the U.S. state of Wyoming.
Yes.
Okay.
Yun ang nangyari. And so that's why in the recent campaign, it was emphasized that it was illegal to do so.
Okay. Well, Professor Borinaga, these are not the only bells that were taken by U.S. forces during the U.S.-Philippine War, correct, sir?
Yes, there were many. There are many other bells.
Right.
Yes.
Well, can you tell us more about them? For example, there is the bell, for example, of San Pedro in Bawang in La Union, but that so that was taken by a certain Army Major General Barry, okay, who eventually became superintendent of the U.S. Military Academy in West Point, and then he left the bell there, right?
Yes.
And then medyo parang nakalimutan, no? People forgot about it, and then it was only in recent years that, in recent decades, that some American veterans, is that correct, sir, discovered it?
Yeah, actually the recent campaigners for the bells, yung sa Balangiga bells, were the ones who initiated the process of having the Bawang bell, San Pedro bell, returned to Bawang.
Sir, marami pa pong ibang church bells that were taken from different churches all over the country. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, sa West Point, there are two other bells that could not be returned because walang special markings na which can lead to their origin.
Kung ano yung location.
Except for the San Pedro bell.
Okay, because for example, the bells, these three bells of Balangiga that we're showing on air right now, nakalagay kung saan siya galing. The bell from Bawang.
They are extensively documented yung pagdala ng Balangiga bells.
And the bell from Bawang in La Union, which found its way to West Point, nakalagay doon from Bawang, La Union. So there are two other. You said there are two other bells. Where exactly on the campus of West Point are those two bells?
It's in their museum, but yung one bell only had a year, and another bell has both a year and just a place name that cannot lead to a good locator of where it comes from. So,
but how do we know that they are from the Philippines? It says so na galing Pilipinas.
The record shows there, at least in their inventory, that those bells came from the Philippines.
Okay. So are there other bells in other parts of the United States, other U.S. military bases on U.S. soil or on other U.S. territories around the world that exist, that have been brought there? Do we know?
Yes, I know of one other bell that is being offered for return, and parang my help was asked, but still there are not good leads on determining where they came from.
And where is this bell, sir, that you are talking about?
It belongs to one retired professor in the U.S.
Where in the U.S., sir?
Maryland or something.
Maryland. Okay. Pero hindi, no information as to its origin. So there's nothing engraved on the bell that will tell us where it's from.
I know about at least 3 bells that in that situation, walang masyadong leads.
Okay, yung 3 bells na yun yung dalawa sa West Point pa at yung isa, ito, yung sa Maryland.
Yes. So from a retired professor in the US.
So that's all. So there are only 3 Philippine church bells that are in the United States. Wala nang iba.
At least nasa uli na yung San Pedro bell. I think there are other bells. Hindi pa lang the other owners have not yet volunteered for the return. But hopefully with the return of the bells sa Balangiga, they will come out eventually.
Parang sunod-sunod na siya. This will be a precedent, no?
Yes.
Sir, can you tell us about this? Is there a book written or prepared by the Catholic Church hierarchy after the U.S.-Philippine War, 1902 or 03, which lists down the churches that were destroyed during that war, and if any of the artifacts in that church, any of the religious figures, including the church bells, were taken by U.S. forces?
I know that there's a publication of what were the losses. I know there's a certain document of that in the U.S. archives. But there wala pang itemization on where they are and where they can be located, so that the requests for the return can be made.
But perhaps now, because like you said, because of the return of the 3 Balangiga bells, and given the nature of media now, it's all over the world anyway, and there is social media, so people will hear about it, and perhaps if they have leads, and if they know of other such similar church bells that belong to the Philippines, they can also, inform authorities, for example. Sir, can you also tell us if, give us a little bit more information about this law that was passed by the U.S. Congress that now allows the return of the bells?
Okay, so during the time of President Ramos, actually, President Clinton offered to President Ramos to return the bells of Balangiga in the spirit of fair play, but certain sectors in the State Department said that was illegal. And so when President Ramos asked finally in 1997 and 1998 to have the bells returned in time for the declaration of Philippine Independence Centennial, the delegation from Wyoming, a senator, filed a bill prohibiting the transfer of veterans' memorial objects without a specification in law. And at that time, it lasted 5 years and refiled almost every other 5 years when the issue for the return of the Balangiga bells came up 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
And then finally, the previous prohibition lapsed on September
last
30,
year, 2017.
At saka yun, parang binantayan na yun ng campaigners. And bills, legislation, bills were filed both in the House and in the Senate of the U.S. So that a law or provision can be made so that the bells can be returned to the Philippines. And finally, it became a provision in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2018, allowing the bells of Balangiga to be returned to the Philippines. There's already a provision.
Itong provision po na binabanggit po ninyo, sir, ito po yung binasa ko kanina kay Molly Cucina, U.S. Embassy Attaché, itong modification of prohibition on transfer of veterans' memorial objects. So
yes.
U.S. senators and congressmen themselves, found a way to overcome this law.
Yes, it actually, because veterans across the United States who have been informed about, their support has been solicited. And so they wrote to their congressmen and senators to be sympathetic to legislative moves to have the bells returned to the Philippines. So that's what happened during this cycle of campaign cycle.
But, and final word, sir, very briefly, like 15 seconds, I guess in spite of everything and after everything that has happened all these decades, today was a good day.
Yes, it's a very happy day for all of us.
Thank you, Dr. Rolando Borinaga, historian. Sir, thank you very much for joining us. This has been a special presentation of Newsnight, the Balangiga Bells, now back in the Philippines. I'll see you again at 7 for the second edition of the show. I'm Pia Ontiveros.
This program is brought to you by Bank of Commerce, an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation. This program is brought to you by Bank of Commerce, an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation.
This is Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines. I'm Pia Ontiveros. Our top stories: the long road home for the bells of Balangiga, but they are finally back and make new history in Filipino-American relations. Now part of history, the Balangiga bells are finally back in the country after more than a century since they were taken by American soldiers as war booty. The United States says returning the bells is just the right thing to do. Our senior correspondent David Santos tells us more.
On board a C-130 plane that carried the emblem of a U.S. general familiar to many Filipinos, the Balangiga bells, just like Douglas MacArthur during the Japanese occupation, they have returned. Americans seized them as war booty, and more than a century since then, the bells are a step closer to where they should belong. For most descendants of the Balangiga uprising in 1901, seeing the bells up close and personal for the first time is a moving experience.
It is a very emotional journey, and I always cry every time.
Dolores Matias is a great-granddaughter of Pedro Abayan, then Balangiga's El Presidente del Pueblo or town mayor, and among those who led the attack against the American forces.
And those peaceful town people took part in that very gruesome rebellion. I even couldn't believe that my grandfather, who was a very religious man, could be there, could wield a bolo, and maybe took a life.
The negotiation for the bells' return took about half a century. President Duterte has been vocal about his anti-U.S. sentiments and demanded last year that Washington give back the bells. And so it did. The U.S. passed a law this year clearing legal obstacles for the bells' return. Then the Trump administration facilitated it, despite some opposition.
I don't see any real opposition to the return of the bells, and I think, there were just some people making a lot of noise.
U.S. officials, however, insist things fell into place to have the bells returned, and it was just the right thing to do.
It's really much more than just one president or one request or one demand. I mean, this is something that many people have worked on for a very long time.
This is a gesture that we hope is viewed positively as an investment in this relationship in our alliance.
Historians say both the Philippines and U.S. have emotional attachment to the bells. These have many symbolisms representing each country's struggle and interests.
It is our hope that they will no longer remind us of that painful episode of our joint history. Instead, let them serve as a memorial to those soldiers who fought valiantly for their country.
Before these are transported to Samar, the public can view the Balangiga bells at the Air Force Museum here inside the Villamor Air Base. David Santos, CNN Philippines.
Join us here in the studio live, Dr. Rolando Borinaga, historian and secretary of the National Committee on Historical Research at the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Dr. Borinaga, thank you for joining us here in the studio. Let's begin with this. Of course, everyone knows President Duterte said very specifically in his State of the Nation address last July 2017, give us back our bells. But even before that, meron nang gumagalaw sa U.S. Congress, correct? In early 2017. What was happening, sir?
So in the U.S. Congress at the time, around May or June, the House of Representatives, they have already fixed the idea that supposedly the 5-year prohibition for the return of veterans' memorial objects without a specification in law would lapse by September 30.
5-year prohibition. This is provided for in a law.
In a law
existing law
that was passed in 2012. 2012. That was filed again by the Wyoming delegation to stall the return of the bells.
Yes, because
in time for the visit of President Aquino at that time. So although it is
Sir, sandali lang po. So Wyoming, because 2 of the 3 bells were in Wyoming.
Are in the state.
Okay, just to remind the viewers.
Yes.
Okay.
So the provision would lapse September 30, 2017. But as early as March, the House of Representatives in the U.S. had already their draft said extend the provision by another 5 years.
From September 2017 up to
2022. But the Senate version was already silent about extending the prohibition. So without
in other
that,
words,
then it would lapse in September 30.
Lapse on September 30.
So
if the return of what they call veteran memorial objects.
Yes.
Because that is how they describe anything that was taken for the Philippines during the Philippine-US War.
Yes.
Okay.
So would lapse, but there was a conflict between the Senate version and the House version, and so there was veterans were basically asked to write letters to their congressmen and senators to basically
allow the return,
allow the lapse for the return of veterans' memorial objects. There was no mention about bells of Balangiga, just allow, because
but the specific provision referring specifically and that's repetitive, refers specifically to the bells of Balangiga. So it was like an exception.
Parang it was just the veterans' memorial objects, but since that provision in the law was filed in around 1998, that became a law. It only applied to the bells of Balangiga on the representation of the
Senate.
Of the
so in other words,
senators and congressmen
dito sa Pilipinas, meron po tayong bicameral conference committee. Yun ang nangyari. May House version may Senate version. Ang House version dun sa Amerika i-extend natin 5 years hanggang 2022. Ang Senado naman ng Amerika, let it lapse on September 30, 2017. So ang sabi ng mga senador ng Amerika, kung gusto nyo yun, i-exempt natin ang bells ng Balangiga.
So that was now during the bicameral conference committee.
Okay. So we have that law, and that is what allows what happened today to happen today. But all this while, of course, decades of hard work behind the scenes by so many other people.
Basically, 5 cycles. 4 failed campaigns and a successful campaign that virtually started in 2013. Yung planning and
sir, you said the veterans. No, so you're talking about the U.S. veterans.
This was really now a U.S. veteran to U.S. veteran effort to educate veterans about what really happened.
And of course, the veterans of that war naturally are all deceased already.
Of course.
Pati yung mga heirs or descendants nila involved sa discussion.
On the American side, the daughter of the first soldier to be attacked in Balangiga is still alive, and she's my friend, and she favors the return of the bells. And so this gave a lot of push for the return because a daughter and relatives of other descendants
were involved.
Favor the return.
And then other U.S. veterans, meaning U.S. veterans of other wars, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, etc. And it was interesting earlier, before we started the show, you were explaining that there was the U.S. veterans themselves were enlightened as to the history behind the bells, which will explain why there should have been only one bell that should have been, if we follow their description of what a veteran memorial object is, only one bell should have been taken with them.
Yes, because the two others were not rung during the attack.
Okay, the two others, which were in Wyoming.
Yeah, the ones in Wyoming, yes.
So it was the bell in South Korea that was rung during the attack.
That was the signal bell.
The signal bell.
But it was rung after the attack has started, not...
Okay. And that convinced the veterans, the U.S. veterans?
Well, at least that was part of the education process that finally convinced them about what really happened. And it helped in the campaign for the return of the bells. Enlightenment, education, information dissemination, and enlightenment.
Sir, earlier in the special edition at 6 p.m. we were talking to you on the phone, and we talked about other church bells that were taken from Philippine churches by U.S. forces during the U.S.-Philippine War. So we are aware, and that bell had already been returned in May 2016, the bell in Bawang in La Union. But you were saying that, Bawang. But you were saying that there are two bells in West Point that are Philippine church bells, but it isn't clear kung saan sila nanggaling.
Yes, because photos of this were in fact sent to me for basically trying to decipher where these bells came from. Only the one in Wyoming and for Bawang La Union had enough information that could incontestably established that the bell came from.
That bell from Bawang La Union was brought to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. There are two other bells also at West Point.
Yes, in their museum. They are willing to return it, but
they just don't know where.
They
so you mean there was no record whatsoever when those? But did they tell Philippine authorities or you what year those bells were brought there to the museum at West Point?
Not much information. It's just these bells were taken to the U.S. and then donated to the museum.
Okay, so why don't they just return it to the Philippine government? Because there are also there is a
hindi mahanap yung origin kung saan.
Hindi, but to return lang to the Philippine government para nasa National Museum or some. Or is the law, does the law apply to them, to those bells also?
Hindi no. The law does not apply to them. But so for instance, if my opinion is asked, kung wala yung owner, then it's very hard. They might as well keep it for the meantime.
Okay. So and finally, sir, like you were explaining earlier, there are other church bells. We're just not aware yet as to where they are. Right?
Hopefully, this can create a momentum for the return of heritage objects taken from the Philippines during the Philippines. Not only church bells, but any other objects with heritage values. So for instance, there is an aguinaldo table at West Point.
Aguinaldo table. Use it as what? His dining table? His desk?
Well, it looked like yung anting-anting table ni Aguinaldo noon na that was captured by U.S. forces. My theory is that in Lubuagan, somewhere in the mountain of Abra at the time, but but it's now Kalinga.
Okay.
It was taken to West Point. They are also willing to return that, but I'm still trying to document.
Okay. Well, there is an Aguinaldo Museum in Baguio.
Whatever. But the plan is to have that table returned. Hopefully in time for the 150th birthday of Aguinaldo next year. And the campaigners for this return of the bells are willing to extend help for that.
Sila rin. Dennis Wright.
Yes, Dennis Wright, McKinnon. And,
okay. Well, this is great. Well, it was a good day today for Philippine history and for Filipino heritage. Sir, Dr. Rolando Borinaga, sir, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. Thank you for your time. I'm Pio Ontiveros. See you again tomorrow for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
This program is brought to you by Bank of Commerce, an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation.
This is the newsroom on CNN Philippines. Tonight, the Balangiga bells are back in the country, marking new history in Filipino-American relations.
This program is brought to you by Bank of Commerce, an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ruth Cabal. Thanks for joining us. A moment now part of history. The Balangiga bells are finally back in the country after more than a century since they were taken by American soldiers as war booty. The United States says returning the bells is just the right thing to do. Our senior correspondent David Santos tells us more.
On board a C-130 plane that carried the emblem of a U.S. general familiar to many Filipinos, the Balangiga bells, just like Douglas MacArthur during the Japanese occupation, they have returned. Americans seized them as war booty, and more than a century since then, the bells are a step closer to where they should belong. For most descendants of the Balangiga uprising in 1901, seeing the bells up close and personal for the first time is a moving experience.
It is a very emotional journey, and I always cry every time.
Dolores Matias is a great-granddaughter of Pedro Abayan, then Balangiga's El Presidente del Pueblo or town mayor, and among those who led the attack against the American forces.
And those peaceful town people took part in that very gruesome rebellion. I even couldn't believe that my grandfather, who was a very religious man, could be there, could wield a bolo, and maybe took a life.
The negotiation for the bells' return took about half a century. President Duterte has been vocal about his anti-U.S. sentiments and demanded last year that Washington give back the bells. And so it did. The U.S. passed a law this year clearing legal obstacles for the bells' return. Then the Trump administration facilitated it, despite some opposition.
I don't see any real opposition to the return of the bells, and I think, there were just some people making a lot of noise.
U.S. officials, however, insist things fell into place to have the bells returned, and it was just the right thing to do.
It's really much more than just one president or one request or one demand. I mean, this is something that many people have worked on for a very long time.
This is a gesture that we hope is viewed positively as an investment in this relationship in our alliance.
Historians say both the Philippines and U.S. have emotional attachment to the bells. These have many symbolisms representing each country's struggle and interests.
It is our hope that they will no longer remind us of that painful episode of our joint history. Instead, let them serve as a memorial to those soldiers who fought valiantly for their country.
Before these are transported to Samar, the public can view the Balangiga bells at the Air Force Museum here inside the Villamor Air Base. David Santos, CNN Philippines.
A partless group says it's not enough that the Balangiga bells were returned. Bayan Muna Representative Carlos Zarate says the U.S. should also apologize for atrocities U.S. soldiers committed in Samar during the Philippine-American War. He also asks the U.S. to compensate victims and return other war trophies it took from other parts of the country. Meantime, residents of Balangiga town in eastern Samar are celebrating the return of the bells. They could not hold back tears of joy when they saw the bells and taken out of the crates for the descendants of the town warriors. The return of the bells in Balangiga on Saturday signals closure of a dark yet victorious past.
Just learning that it is already in our land, the Philippine soil. Naku. We are already, we feel it in our hearts and in our skins, in our body, whole body.
Kanina nanonood kami sa TV, we were looking at the footage doon sa Villamor Air Base. Sabi, iba pala yung feeling pag para bang may ino-open kami na regalo sa Christmas.
They're important because they remind us of the patriotism of our forebears. They wanted to defend the town from, say, tyranny of invaders.
Once the bells arrive in Balangiga, they will be displayed for public viewing before local officials put them back to their belfry. What do netizens have to say about the return of the Balangiga bells? Let's check some of the comments. This Facebook user casts doubt on the historic move. Gerard Valdepeña says, totoo kaya yung binalik nila? Hindi ba kaya replica lang yan? Meantime, this netizen considers the move remarkable. Rose Pascual says, isa sa kasaysayan after 117 years. Julie Brusola is all praises. She says, congrats to our government, past and present, for their efforts, hoping and praying for more victories. Rico del Rosario describes the bells as beautiful. He adds, may their return spark an interest among all Filipinos, young and old, to study and appreciate our nation's history. That's the newsroom tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm Ruth Cabal. Good evening.
This program is brought to you by Bank of Commerce, an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation.